A record migration surge into Spain's North African exclave of Ceuta has exposed deep divisions across Europe, with Italy suspending Schengen arrangements with Spain and France tightening border controls. Is Europe facing a migration crisis or a coordinated hybrid attack? Joining us is Tomasz Kasprowicz, editor-in-chief of Res Publica Nowa. Tomasz, welcome back to TVP World. Thanks for taking time.
Good evening.
Good evening. So, around 60,000 people going into the Spanish exclave of Ceuta in a few hours. Is that a migration or an invasion? It sounds like the latter one to me.
It sounds like a latter one, but it seems that the migration is being weaponized as a hybrid warfare method. Here in Poland, we are pretty well accustomed to with that on our eastern border with Belarus, where migrants were shipped to our borders to break in. 60,000 people in such a short notice. That is a huge logistic endeavor that needed to be coordinated to happen at the same time. We know that the similar surges happened in the past, but even the largest one in the past was about 5 times smaller than the current one. And we don't see any particular reasons why exactly yesterday so many people would decide to go to Spain at the same time. And what we know already is that it seems that about 2/3 of those people that got into a Spanish exclave already left. It resembles very much a coordinated attack with people out of which many are not even interested in going to European Union at all.
Well, that may be so, but I mean, most of them swam across. They took their lives into their hands. About 50, almost 60 people died on the swim across. So it doesn't sound like they were planning on going back, does it? I mean...
Well, we don't know what they were planning and what they believed and what they were convinced to believe. Of course, Spanish migration policy makes it easy to convince a lot of people that it's a good idea to migrate to Spain because it's probably the easiest point of entry to Europe currently. But of course, getting into African exclave is not the same as getting to European Union. Let's not forget that it's not easy to get from there to Europe, and there are checks. Therefore, all of the discussions about Spain being suspended into Schengen zone seems to be a little bit far-fetched and politically motivated. So I'm sure there's a lot of people there that would like to find themselves in European Union. However, the whole event is very well coordinated and take into consideration that Spain was an object of threats recently. We can have a suspicion that the coordination went further than just the human smuggling gangs.
OK, now I want to talk about the EU in just a second, but you've referred twice now to the fact that it's a possibility that this was coordinated. Who by and for what reason?
Well, here we can only speculate. We know that Spain's decisions about its international policy were highly unpopular, especially with respect to current conflict in Gaza and Iran. So both countries involved in those conflicts issued warnings and threats towards Spain. We don't know whether what's happening is basically the punishment for Spanish position or just an accident. But taking into consideration just a couple of days ago, Israel, for example, threatened Spain with very serious consequences, not specifying what those consequences might be, and now is issuing very, let's say, sarcastic messages about this crisis raises a lot of eyebrows.
Okay, well, as you say, it is speculation. We shall wait and see if we find out more. Now, moving to the EU, you think that Italy suspending Spain's access to Schengen is an overreaction. But surely there is much to be said for doing that. I mean, we have a long history in Europe of people entering Europe at one place and then travelling all over the place. The problem needs to be contained before it can be reversed, doesn't it?
Of course, but let's not forget those people did not enter European Union proper and did not enter Schengen zone proper. So those suspensions in the Schengen zone will not be protecting countries from those particular people entering Spanish exclave. They can protect those countries from other migrants that are already in Spain, but clearly this invasion is used as an excuse to introduce those measures. And it's clearly an excuse in many cases. Let's not forget that Germany said that it will prolong its checks on the Polish-German border because of the attack in Africa. So clearly there is a lot of political maneuvering around this event that is tragic, as you mentioned, about 50 or 60 dead, but far away from the EU core.
Okay, now I also want to talk about, you mentioned Belarus sending illegals to the border with Poland, and so far the Polish border guard has done a great job of keeping them out, but it's not just Poland that's being attacked in this way. Of course, the Baltic states are as well. Estonia comes to mind. Tunnels have been found. What's that? How would you classify that kind of action?
Well, this type of warfare is clearly aimed at destabilizing the societies in the European Union's countries and European Union as a whole. So we can see that this event, however spectacular and tragic, but very limited in scope, is threatening the Schengen zone. That is one of the big achievements of European Union. This also gives rise to further political polarization and strengthening far-right parties in European countries that are basically fear-mongering with respect to migration. This is especially easy with respect to Spain, that is going kind of against the current of European Union policies towards migration, which policies are let's say, much lighter on migration than the rest of the European Union, including abolitions and legalizations of illegal migrants that, for example, find their place on the job market, which in general seems like quite sensible policy. But this is contrary to a lot of right-wing politics. And this is hardly surprising that Meloni is one of the starker critics of Spain and is using these events to basically suggest that the Spain as a whole is not stable and Europe should basically cut it off from the Schengen zone because such terrible things are happening in Spain. But this is, as I want to say again, African exclave of Spain that has nothing to do with EU mainland.
Well, that's true enough. However, it is part of something. It is another example of something that's been happening for over a decade in Europe. I mean, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. You mentioned that it gives right-wing parties greater ammunition, if you like. But would you say that even the centre of the political spectrum is finally beginning to realise that net effect of illegal migration is perhaps not the optimal solution? In other words, is the centre moving to the right in this regard?
Of course, that is true, and there was a huge change about migration in the policy, with the Spain being one of the exceptions here again. And definitely mass illegal migration is something that we should prevent and stop. And in general, sending the army into the place of crisis and deporting those illegal migrants is definitely the right policy, because European Union cannot and will not tolerate this sort of crisis. However, the unfortunate consequence of that is that those policies start to target not only illegal migration but also all other types of migration, and are starting to fester the anti-migration and xenophobic sentiments. And let's not forget that Europe is a continent that is aging rapidly. We need migrants. Of course, that doesn't mean we need all of the migrants that want to come here at any cost, but we have to be prepared to welcome quite a few people if we want to have our economy prospering and have our retirement payments to be paid on time and in the amount that is sufficient for our retirees. This is not that we are deciding about whether Europe should be as it was 20 years ago or different. We are deciding whether Europe will be old and empty or populated and vibrant.
Yes, although some might say, well, it's, if you can tweak your migration policy, you can get exactly the situation you describe. It's the illegal migrants over whom the countries have zero control that seem to be the issue here. Very briefly, if you would, please, Tomasz, is the Schengen zone dangerous in this particular context? Should it be at least suspended for a while until the problem is sorted out?
No, it shouldn't, because as I said, this particular crisis does not involve Schengen zone in any way.
Yes, but this is just a part of a much bigger picture, Tomasz. I'm talking about the bigger picture.
No, so nothing particularly big changed in the recent weeks or months. And let's say the Schengen zone is being undermined for quite a while. Let me bring again the German-Polish border that is still being controlled for not only German-Polish, but also the German-Czech border that's being controlled for basically no particular good reason other than political reason of staving off far-right parties that are insisting that that's where all of the troubles are coming from. This means migrants coming en masse through the border.
Tomasz Kasprowicz, thank you very much indeed for sharing your analysis with our audience, and have a good evening.
Good evening.
Bye-bye. That brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Don't go away, lots more coming up. Goodbye.